Yeah, but she wants to make a few dollars when you give them this. So the top is very short.
Is this on the agenda tonight or not?
Yeah.
It is? Okay,
On
great.
the regular.
Okay, fine. So I'll go read it, let her make a few comments, and we'll move on. Thank you. I'll write that down.
It is now 5 o'clock. Let's call the meeting of the whole to order. This time for our meeting, Mayor, Dr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Tonight, we'll start with a presentation of the crime statistics by the interim police chief, Charles Williams.
Mayor,
Evening.
Madam Manager, thank you again for allowing me to come before you and speak on the crime stats for the city of Bucktown. What we'll be covering is for March of 2021. First slide is a comparison of March last year, 2020 to March 2021. You'll notice we have had a reduction in just about every category, except for commercial B&E, a little bit further down in the middle. For our violent crime, we're down by 8 crimes a month. And for property crime, we're down by 27 crimes month to month. Year to date, we're down by 35 crimes. And month to month, we're down by 35 crimes. And year to date, we're down by 44 crimes. Next slide covers our aggravated assaults. We did have a total of 20 victims of aggravated assaults. 10 of those victims were injured, 2 of those victims were not injured. We have been able to clear 3 cases. 3 cases are inactive. We currently have 10 open cases, and we were able to identify 2 of these cases as being gang-related of the onset of the case. Next slide, aggravated assaults. Of the 20 victims, it was 16 actual cases that we have investigated. We have, in 4 of the cases, we have multiple victims. We have made 4 arrests in those cases. And again, 3 of those cases have been cleared by arrest. Next slide shows shots fired throughout the city. We responded to 78 shots fired calls. 25 of those cases, or 25 of those calls, we found shell casings. We collected a total of 155 shell casings. We have seized 47 firearms, or seized 47 firearms during the month of March, bringing our total year-to-date 131 firearms seized. Also, for the month of March, we were able to make 10 weapons violation arrests. Next slide shows some property crimes cleared by arrest. Total of 8 cases cleared by arrest involving larceny and commercial break-in and entrance. We have continued our community involvement with the police department. We are beginning to work with our softball and baseball practices in connection with Parks and Recreation and our PALS League. We are also planning a Citizens Police Academy and Junior Police Academy for the summer of 2021 this summer. But we do not have any specific dates as of yet. And then we also conducted a presentation for Covenant Homes community, which is an elderly community in the city. And we had approximately 25 residents attend that presentation. The presentation was on elderly safety and residential safety. I'll be glad to take any questions you have.
I know last time I asked you about those shots fired, and when you look at the circle where the shots fired together, heavy concentration of shots fired.
Yes, sir.
Is there anything we can look at why we got that heavier concentration of shot fired in that one area? We're trying to look at anything with that.
So what you're seeing on the map it's mainly in the south eastern portion of our city is where our shot spotter is. So any shots that are fired in that area are automatically, a call is automatically generated by the shot spotter system. So the remainder of the map shows some shots fired being reported. However, there we are relying on an individual to call it in. But that's the reason you see a concentration of calls within the southeastern portion of the city.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I was wondering, as a follow-up to his question, so then are there different policing measures you're taking in those particular areas or communities where there's a higher frequency of shots fired? Is there any type of strategy that we are working on, or are you just sort of holding what you're doing until a new administration?
No, actually, the crime analysis unit generates a shot spotter report monthly. That's given to our supervisors and passed along to our officers so that we can concentrate in the areas where there are more frequent shots fired. The other thing we have that shot spotter allows us to do is collect the evidence where the shots are being fired. We use that to match shell casings and then match the shell casing to weapons that have either been seized or that have been used in crimes, and we're able to connect crimes together. So we do use it as an investigative tool, also as a crime analysis tool to place our officers in the areas of high shots fired calls or incidents.
So that means you have heavier policing presence in those communities?
Well, we respond to what our data shows us. So again, in that area, being the south and the east areas, we're going to have more data because it's computer generated or generated by a shot spotter. So we would be reacting. Obviously, there's more data in that area than it is in other parts of the city. Yes, sir.
Are we still exploring cameras? We said we was going to look at those along with the spot shotters.
Yeah, yes, sir. And that is currently being placed in the budget, and the city manager is aware of that, and we haven't made it that far in the budget process as of yet.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Help me with the number of firearms seized with the weapon violation arrest. There's 47 seized and 10 arrests. Is there a correlation, or is it not a correlation with the number of firearms seized to compare to the arrest?
So firearms, looking at the firearm seized number, there may be several different reasons we would seize a firearm. We may answer a call where a firearm is seized for someone's safety, say in the instance of domestic violence, person that's suicidal. We would seize those firearms and bring them to the police department. The other explanation for that number is if I arrest you and you have multiple firearms on you, it's still only one arrest, but several, 5 or 6 different firearms or whatever you have on you at the time would cause a disparity in that number.
We'll follow up with that. When typically an arrest, is it a one-to-one correlation if there is an arrest with a weapons violation, or do you often find multiple firearms with an arrest?
Both. A lot of times when we stop a vehicle with multiple people in the car, we find multiple firearms in a vehicle. I would say, I don't put a number on it, but rarely do people carry multiple firearms on them. But in the case of a vehicle stop or dealing with multiple people, we have multiple firearms present. Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilman President.
In your presentation to the senior citizens at the Covenant Homes, do you include trying to help them avoid being scammed? Or
Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Brad Summerlin conducted that presentation. So what we went over was general residential safety things that you can do at home to make your home more secure, as well as personal safety. So when you go out in public, things to look for, your surroundings, people following you, especially in cases of elderly, when they're coming back home, being aware of their surroundings before they get out of their vehicle, going into their house, things of that nature. So we did cover personal safety, residential safety, and then in that presentation, we talk about telephone scams and things of that nature that would often prey on the elderly. Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
No other questions. Thank you, Chief, for your presentation, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you all.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of council, we know it's springtime, and usually that means some sort of plan that needs to be done and prepared and sent to HUD. This time, we're at a point where we have to prepare a 3-year consolidated plan. And so there's a process for the preparation of the plan and for public input. We're at a point now where Mr. Varner is prepared to present a proposed 3-year plan, along with the annual action plan, as well as the analysis of impediments within the Fair Housing Choice Program. But every 3 years, we have to present a 3-year action plan, if you will, to HUD. And so this is a part of the process of introducing it to the city council as well as to the public, and then it's finalized by a vote of the council, and then it's sent off to HUD. This is a requirement in order for us to receive our HUD funding. Peter.
That's correct. We have 3 documents we want to talk about. You'll see these here. The first is the 3-year plan, what we call the consolidated plan, covering addressing how we would spend money from community development block grant and home funds for the next 3 fiscal years. Included in this is the annual action plan, which talks about how we would spend the funding from those 2 sources for the coming fiscal year. And then the third document is the analysis of impediments for housing choice, for fair housing. You can see there's a fairly substantial document. As everybody knows, I think Rocky Mount is an entitlement city and has been since the mid-1990s. And what that means is that the city, along with other cities across the nation, over 50,000 population, receive an allocation automatically determined by HUD. We no longer have to make applications for a competitive review by HUD. These are automatic allocations, and they come from two sources. One is from Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and the other is for home. And so these documents have been prepared for your consideration, and we'll be looking for your action on them at a future meeting. And Cornelia McGee is going to help me with these slides to get through this, and hopefully will help me with the questions that may continue afterwards. We followed a public process, or trying to follow a public process. We put these documents out on display April 1st, and they'll be on display through May 3rd. They're physically on display in the reception area in our office on the second floor, and electronically can be accessed through the city's website. You might have seen the ad in the Rocky Mount Telegram yesterday, Sunday's edition, indicating the availability of these documents. We're here on April the 12th, giving you a very broad brush overview of what's in these documents. You'll have a public hearing at your next meeting on April 26th. We'll make a presentation early in May to the Edgecombe County Board of Commissioners, and then we'd be looking for your action on these documents on May the 10th. Our target is to get these documents up to HUD by May 15th in order that we can begin to receive funding in July. Let's see. We did we invited public comment from various agencies during the period November 30th through January 28th. So those that we invited and who responded include the Human Relations Commission, the Rocky Mountain Area Youth Council, the Community Academy, Down East Home Consortium, the Rocky Mountain Housing Authority, and the Southeast North Carolina Community Development Corporation, the Tar Heel Regional Continuum of Care Committee, Legal Aid of North Carolina, the Rocky Mountain Redevelopment Commission, city staff, North Carolina Association of Community Development Corporations, and the Boys and Girls Club. And we in the document, if you were to read the document, you see several pages of comments that we received. So we tried to digest what we thought were the main ones, or the most frequently ones that we heard. And you see those here. First is that we need to prepare a plan, a strategic approach to development for housing, and that you all spent a lot of time last week talking about that. Also talking about an affordable housing bond was mentioned several times. Another request to fully implement the Atlantic-Arlington Corridor Land Use Plan, provide incentives to developers to encourage the private market to develop affordable housing. To continue the Workforce Housing Advisory Commission. That commission got underway, I think, at the beginning of last year, and then pretty much had to suspend because of COVID. And since I've been back, have met with them. So they're getting reactivated. And then the last one was housing rehabilitation. Most of what we've done through the years has been in the area of housing rehabilitation. These meetings, by the way, were virtual meetings that were conducted. The consolidated plan goals you see there look fairly simple. That is to provide decent housing, suitable living environment in the neighborhoods, inner city neighborhoods, and to expand economic opportunities. But what's behind that is in these documents is a fairly extensive collection of data. For example, in the area of needs assessments, an extensive needs assessment was conducted. One of the things it addresses is the percentage of households that are cost burdened. We talked about this at the retreat last week. Cost burden relates to those households that spend more than 30% of their household income on housing. And it further divides those numbers by renters and by owners, and further categorizes those by demographic categories such as the elderly and single parent households and so on. Another piece of the data that's in there is the change in real incomes. Covers the period 2010 through 2015. It concludes, that section concludes that low income households face choice the choice of either deficient housing or being cost burdened. Another piece of information in there is the percentage of households that live alone. I was surprised to see in this that 31% of the population inside the city limits, households live alone. Another piece of information that's provided in there is about the housing authorities. We have 2 housing authorities in the 2-county area, one in Rocky Mount, one in Tarboro. Talks about the number of units that each of those entities provides and the funding sources and so on for that, the number of people that are served through those housing authorities. Another piece of this is a housing market analysis. Talks about our housing stock, percentage of housing that is single family, percentage that is owner occupied, and so on. What the data concludes is that there's a high priority should be given to urgent housing repair, blight abatement, and rehab of rental and multifamily housing. The point of all of that is to say that we have before us a lot of data from these in these reports, but we also combine that with the comments that we receive. So the comments from community voices and the data is what we look to make the plan. So what we conclude, and this is related to the consolidated plan, the 3-year plan, are these priority needs that you see here. One is to increase access to and improve the quality of affordable housing, eliminate slum and blight influences in the inner city neighborhoods, improving public facilities and infrastructure, providing public services, providing economic development opportunities, strengthening fair housing enforcement, operations and education, and planning and administration. To speak a little bit about public services that you see in there, what we have done with funding in the past with this is provide services, funding for the Boys and Girls Club, United Community Ministries at the Bassett Center, funding for Rocky Mountain Edgecombe Community Development Corporation for housing counseling, the Buck Leonard Association for construction trades, funding also for ripple effects, and My Sister's House, a facility for people suffering domestic abuse. The next slide talks about the annual plan. This is the annual plan, and the funding source for this comes from the Community Development Block Grant, comes from HUD, but through their CDBG funding program. And this is what we would propose, how we would propose to use the funding that would come in this coming fiscal year. What we're expecting is a little over $500,000 that you see there, a little over $100,000 for administration. We borrowed money some years ago to use for the financing for the Douglas Block. Section 108 loan is what that was called, and we're making payments on that. As I recall, it was a 19-year loan, and we should be about halfway through that. So the amount you see there would be to make that annual payment, debt service payment. Public service, 15% of the money would be used for public service. You see there, and we just talked about some of how we have been spending that money. Redevelopment projects, this is the amount of money that we would use for improvements in the inner city neighborhoods and rehab delivery costs. That relates to environmental assessments that we have to do for any project that we undertake. There's an environmental assessment that we need. And then $25,000 we're showing for economic development activity. What we're proposing there is funding that we could use with the Nash and Edgecombe Community College small business centers. What we believe exists is a number of small businesses in the inner city neighborhoods and immediately adjacent to those. And it may be that we could provide some connection between some of those businesses and the community college resources to assist with maybe some startups or assist in doing plans and so on. Included in that would be the continuation of funding for the Rocky Mountain Edgecombe Community Development Corporation for their business counseling and technical assistance services. redevelopment projects that we had in mind was to provide money for the Atlantic corridor. There's maybe some rehab, some houses that could stand to be rehabbed in that corridor. Also, some rehab in the Southeast Rocky Mount section of the city, some home purchase agreements, maybe some funds to acquire vacant lots for new construction. Let's see, this next slide talks about some of the things I just went through, acquisition and rehab of real property in those areas that you see there, single-family housing rehabilitation in the Atlantic and Arlington redevelopment area, economic development, technical assistance. This says Section 8, it means Section 108 is for the loan repayment for the Douglas block, and then the public services that you see there, I just mentioned a few minutes ago. The next slide shows the funding. Let's see if I can find this. Funding that would come from HOME for the Down East Home Consortium. Rocky Mount is the lead entity for HUD funding in our area, and we were invited back in the mid or late 1990s to form a consortium of those jurisdictions around us. So we formed a consortium, I think it was in 1997, that consisted of Nash County and Edgecombe County and all of the municipalities within those jurisdictions. And so this funding comes from the home source at HUD, comes to the consortium. And you can see the amount we expect to receive this year is this coming year, I should say, is a little over $400,000. And you can see how we would plan to spend that money. $40,000 would be retained by the city for administrative cost. There's a reserve that we're showing there, and what we're proposing to do with that is with that reserve and the amounts that we would receive in future home allocations, use that for the reconciliation with Nash and Edgecombe counties. CHODO is Community Housing Development Organizations. We're required by the HUD funding regulations to allocate 15% to community housing development organizations, or what we call CHODOs. So you see an amount there of $61,000, proposing to use that money for the construction of a couple of properties, I think with the Housing Authority in the, I want to say Flag March, but I really mean Watley Cove, right? And also provide some down payment assistance to go along with that. And let's see, there are a couple of misspells I want to call attention to. Is Conedo has 2 E's in it, and Whitaker's has an S on the end. Going to switch over now to, well, actually, the projects we're proposing with the home money would be as shown on this slide here. Continue the Vance Street Homes project. We've entered into an agreement with the Southeast North Carolina Community Development Corporation for development of some homes in the Vance Street area, and this we would plan to continue with that. The Southeast Rocky Mount area and the community around the Y, the redevelopment potential in the area around in the Atlantic and Arlington Street corridor. We talked about the Beale Street lots, remnant lots at the retreat, and so this would allow for that. These areas, Holly Street, Central City, South Rocky Mount, and Down East Consortium, Watley Cove, and then continue with the Nash and Edgecombe County redevelopment projects with home funds. Switching now to impediments, the analysis of impediments to fair housing. So what we're looking at, I think is listed there, 6 items. So one of the impediments that has been identified is lower employment rates and wages. And what that's talking about particularly are protected classes. For example, persons with disabilities more likely to enter the labor force, more likely not to enter the labor force than people without disabilities, and when they do, more likely to earn lower wages than people without disabilities. Another protected class, for example, would be single-parent households. And so those are identified as populations where, because of limited employment opportunity and lower wages, their housing choices obviously are limited by that. Another one is the housing choice voucher. Concentration is concentrated in the inner city neighborhoods. This is a program that's administered by the Housing Authority. And what you see there is a high number of persons with disabilities who are on the wait list for those vouchers, which would indicate a pretty good need for expanding the availability of those vouchers for that particular population. We also are aware that many of our homes in the inner city neighborhoods are older homes that is built long before 1978, and those are homes that have lead paint in them, and so are the children, well, all people, but particularly children, are exposed to the lead paint contamination that's associated with those. Non-white households are less likely to be homeowners. As everybody knows, I think home ownership is a means for wealth building, generational wealth building, and what the study indicates that African American and Hispanic people who apply for mortgages are more likely to be denied, or if they are approved, the loan cost is more likely to be more costly than it would be for other populations, other demographics. Another one that's on the list there is moderate levels of segregation existing in the inner city neighborhoods. What we see is that housing that is affordable to our low and moderate income population is generally concentrated in the inner city areas. And what we find there is a predominance of African American population in those inner city neighborhoods. Another one on the list there is lack of transportation in areas outside the city of Rocky Mount. Inside the city, we have the Tar River Transit providing service 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And then we have the van service that provides transportation services to people who are clients of some other agencies, such as social services or Tri-County Industries or the health departments and so on. And what this is talking about is inadequate transportation for those people who may be working, but have difficulty getting to and from work. Unreliable transportation. And so what this is suggesting is trying to improve some transportation access for working families to connect them to employment, sources of employment. And the last one on the list, I think you talked about fairly extensively at the retreat, has to do with accessory dwelling units that are now allowed, but they have some limitations on them. And what this report is suggesting is expanding the use of those accessory dwelling units for other people. There are some goals, 4 goals. 4 goals that are listed in the report. One is to expand housing choice and access to opportunity. So to be a little more specific about that, what we're thinking there is continuing funding for rehab and new construction through the years. Most of what we have done is a lot of rehab. So this would continue that. Another approach would be to continue funding for nonprofits, particularly those that provide counseling for career readiness, job training, and education, and the like. And another strategy would be to provide transit access to major employers. Could be just inside the city as well as outside the city. Idea might be to find there may be a major employer who is drawing a good number of people from one of our neighborhoods, say, or the inner city neighborhoods collectively. And it may be that we could match up a transportation source with that particular employer. A second goal would be to increase home ownership, and what we're talking about doing there is funding home buyer counseling services, such as we have engaged in Rocky Mount Edgecombe CDC to do that in the past. Another idea would be to develop a mortgage loan pool at a bank, or maybe multiple banks, in order to make it more possible to support applications for mortgages. It might help people with maybe some credit challenges to get over the hump to where they can obtain a mortgage. A third goal is to expand the housing choice and access to opportunities. So what we're thinking there is that we would support the Human Relations Commission with their fair housing activities. Chapter 12 of the Rocky Mount City Code of Ordinances is the Fair Housing Code. Human Relations Commission responsible for administering and overseeing and enforcing that code. And so what we would propose to do there is to support that effort. And related to that is to ensure good communication and coordination between Human Relations Commission and the Community Development Department. I think that has been taking place and is in good shape, but certainly would be important to continue that. And the last one is to increase home ownership. What we're talking about there on that strategy or that goal is to develop a fair housing guidebook that would be able to be distributed to to people who are looking to rent or to buy, to lenders, to landlords, anybody, so that everybody understands what fair housing is and the importance of complying with that. Another idea related to that is to partner with Nash and Edgecombe counties to hold a fair housing forum so that we can get that information, that word out to those areas that are outside the city. And the last one would be to contract for paired discrimination testing. What that would involve is engaging a firm that would bring someone in of say someone who is white and somebody who is African American, and to make application for a mortgage or make application for a rental someplace, and to see if the treatment is the same. So those are that's a quick summary of these three documents. Dan, ready for questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you so much, Peter and Cornelia. This is a lot of work, a lot of effort. I have a few questions. In the consolidated housing plan, will there be closer coordination of city committees and the plans that develop? And what I mean by that is you have Workforce Housing Advisory Commission that begins to meet again soon. You have Redevelopment Commission that meets and has created some levels of priorities. And, then we have other efforts that we are supporting across the board. Is there anyone that is identified on our team that's working to ensure that there is coordination of activities, planning goals, dollars, resources, so that we have tons of ideas, but how do you implement them? It's still one budget, one city team, and one city. So what are we doing to ensure that?
What are we doing to ensure coordination? Since I've been back, I came back February 15th, had one meeting, and we're getting a second meeting scheduled with the Workforce Housing Advisory Commission. And that first meeting was a lengthy meeting on a Friday afternoon, and the second meeting we're setting the agenda for. I'm going to be talking about the glossary of terms that we use in this realm, and also talking about these plans right here. And I suspect it may not be on the agenda. There'll be some discussion about what took place at the retreat. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are trying to communicate, establish that relationship with them, and in the process of those discussions, keep them informed, keep everybody informed of what everybody else is doing. The Workforce Housing Advisory Committee, we want to let them know what the Redevelopment Commission is interested in doing, what we're trying to do as staff people, what the Human Relations Department is doing, and so on. So we're trying to do that. It takes a lot of time, I will tell you, because of a number of people involved and a lot of conversation, a lot of education involved in all of that, but is an important thing to do. With the Redevelopment Commission, for example, I've met with the leadership of that group twice, and with the commission itself twice now since I've been back, and trying to focus their interests. They want to be interested in the Southeast Rocky Mountain area, but trying to shape up, I guess, their thoughts about what those plans should be, what our resources are, what our capacity is to do the things that everybody wants to do. And so I guess what I want to say is we want to try to coordinate and communicate as best we can with any and all of the parties about what we're trying to do, but recognizing that our resources are limited.
And hoping that all the separate committees are working to advance the larger plan that the city council would adopt and hopefully be responsive to in listening to our feedback from our constituents.
That's right. Yeah.
So
We hope all to be pulling in the same direction,
yes,
realizing that we're not all on the same sled, or we're not all together on it. We got some little differences here and there, but most of us should be going in the same direction.
but the money's coming from the same place.
Money comes from the same places, right?
Right. I got more questions, but I don't want to occupy in case other people have. Okay, and then likewise, that same coordination strategy between the CD department and the transit department. What kind of actual planning is going to be put in place to connect the two together? You know, I know of efforts that are perhaps taking place in transportation or transit, other needs being documented on the CD side, or are we talking to each other on both sides of the house?
Since I've been back, I've not been talking to them yet, but they're on this list, so they're on my list to do that with. I know from the times that I was here before that that the plans the things we heard from citizens about the transit service, the Tar River Transit service that we provide inside the city, always had to do with expansion of times, that the geographical coverage areas were good. That all works good, and the schedules work good. But always the question is, can we expand the times? That is, can we operate instead of 12 hours a day, 18 hours a day? Or can we cover the second shift, say, so people who work on second shift, so that they could use transit? And what this study is saying to us is, can we identify those employers who draw employees from, I'm going to say, from the inner city neighborhoods, not one particular neighborhood like Happy Hill or Little Raleigh, but the general. Can we? Is there an employer or some number of employers that do draw that way? Can we connect them up so that we can dedicate maybe a route for those major employment centers, something like that? That's something that this is calling for. We'll need to have that conversation with our friends at Tar River Transit to get those things done, but that's important to do.
And do we have a vehicle to assess ideas and concerns sort of outside of transit about transit? You know, is there a way that we can get human relations and the CD department and others to query their constituents or their customers about ideas or possibilities that they have, so that we are ensuring that we have the most entrepreneurial and creative opportunities, and not just thinking about traditional the city of Rocky Mount runs a bus system, and a van
Right.
system. This is 2021, and there are lots of innovative ways that cities are bringing to bear in how to move people from place to place.
Yeah, what we would need to do, I think, to do that would be to put that on the agendas of these different groups that would be talking to the Workforce Housing Advisory Commission, for example, Human Relations Commission, redevelopment, all of the groups that we're involved with, in order to begin to get some kind of input or feedback about the service and what the needs are, and maybe how we can go about it. I know too that the transit service, I don't know what the frequency, I don't remember that now. It's every 3 years, every 5 years, but they're required to do a needs assessment as well. And in doing that, soliciting comments from users, but also non-users of the services, both the van service and the fixed route service.
And my last question is around mobile home communities. In the consolidated housing plan, is there any emphasis or any segue at all related to residents of mobile home communities within the city? And if there is not, what can we do to be inclusive of people who live in those communities that are challenged? Perhaps even in greater extremes than those who live in other housing communities.
I have to confess, I don't remember reading anything in these plans about about mobile home communities. I'm going to ask Cornelia. She's shaking her head. The plans do not have information about mobile home communities as separately identifiable communities.
Okay, so
That would be a need we got to tackle, right? I see it coming. I'll get it.
thank you.
Okay.
We talked about it a lot.
Right.
I still don't see a lot done about it, but I know we got a lot to do.
We do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Blackwell. Anyone else? Peter, I do have some concerns. When I look at the communities in South Rocky Mount, and I try to study the historical process of those communities, and I don't know if you can help with this. It appears that those communities have never been owned by the residents in the community, and that the wealth of those communities has always gone outside of the community. So, and there literally has not been a lot of equity in home ownership. And a lot of those properties is managed by a lot of slum kind of management that didn't appear by the city to have a lot of code violations on it. And a lot of those properties appear to have gotten Section 8 vouchers at the same time. And part of my concern is that it appears that those communities now are being bought up by people outside of the community and almost
will continue that same process and victimizing the people in that community. In some way, somehow, how do we begin to try to get more home ownership in those communities?
I'm understanding the question to be addressing the Southeast Rocky Mountain area in particular, or is it? Yeah. Well, there may be more history than you want to endure, but the Southeast Rocky Mountain area was generated really because of the railroad. The railroad, when it was Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, they established some shops there, a small set of shops. And then when it became the Atlantic Coastline Railroad in the 1890s, they expanded the shops significantly. And then again in around 1906. What that means, and the Planters Oil Mill was established in 1903. It was a major fertilizer plant supplying fertilizer to Eastern North Carolina. So what you had in that neighborhood was two major employers, railroad and plant his oil mill. And the people who settled in and built homes in the southeast Rocky Mountain area mainly was a white population, and they mainly were homeowners at that time. This goes back to the 1910s and 1920s. This is old housing. Mainly it was homeowner occupied, but mainly a white population. That population changed, and I think it began to change right after the war, after World War II. People aged and moved out, and I can't tell you exactly how that all happened, but they maybe rented homes, they left their home to move to another place, and then rented the homes or something. But it was a transition that took place from homeowner occupancy to predominantly rental occupancy, and then a major demographic change from a predominantly white population to an African American population. So that neighborhood is, I think, distinct from the other inner city neighborhoods in terms of its history, how it came to be what it is. And so the challenge of how do we get to home ownership, which is what we really would like to see, home ownership, increasing the percentage of home ownership so that it's like 75% home ownership compared to rental occupancy is what we want to try to do. So it's going to take some effort at that. I think a way to do that is more block by block rather than by individual house to try to get that.
My hope is that we will reinvest in those communities at the same level they've been robbed.
Understood.
I was going to also chime in on what Mr. Varner just mentioned about around the why, which I think during urban renewal, that was one of the areas that was chosen. And a lot of those Black residents were displaced and moved throughout the city, like on Planter Street, Oakwood, and so forth. So then that's when George Dickens came through and did the redevelopment of Red Row and try to preserve the history of Thelonious Monk. So that's a little part of that history. I didn't want that that little note not to be added into that,
Right.
that we have experienced that urban renewal in our city at some point. And so that's why we realize gentrification is very important, that we address it so that we won't be like other cities across the country and in this state. We witnessed that in Asheville and how now they are trying to bring those residents back. So not a question. I'm just adding in what you just said for the record. Thank you.
Right. That's correct.
Any other questions?
Any other question for Mr. Peter Varney? If not, thank you so much, Peter, for being back, and thank you both your team and working together.
Thank you.
At this time, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of council, I would request a closed session for attorney-client privilege and real estate.
Open for a motion.
For club.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Knight, second by Councilwoman Chris Miller. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by the sign of aye.
Aye.